How to Get Rich by Donald J. Trump, President of USA. Ask for your raise at the right time. When it comes to your career, certain moves should be made without careful considerations of the old and very apt saying, timing is everything. For example, if you have decided to ask for a raise, look around first. So many times, employees who I like very much do the dumbest things when it comes to conversations about their salaries. Jason Greenblatt, a young and brilliant lawyer who works for me, is terrific at everything he does, but one day I swear he must have been wearing blindfolds and earplugs. I was having an especially tough, vicious, terrible, miserable day that seemed never ending to me and to everyone else. It was a grand slam rotten day. No one could possibly have mistaken it for anything else. Late in the afternoon, by which time I had had enough, I heard a polite knock on my door. I yelled out, "What?" In my most exasperated tone, Jason nonchalantly entered my office, completely ignoring my angry welcome, and proceeded to ask me for a raise. I could not believe a lawyer as smart as Jason could make such a dumb move. I use his real name only because Jason knows how much I like and respect him, despite his incredible fox pass. But I have to tell you that I was ready to kill him. Was he joking? It's amazing, but he wasn't. He was dead serious. I couldn't believe it. Did he get a raise? Not that day. He almost got fired for stupidity, except that I told him to get out before I really lost my temper. I also told him that although he might be brilliant, his timings for certain things needed work, and that maybe he ought to start paying attention to what was going on around him. I remember thinking to myself, did I really hire such a person? But as I said, I had been a rough day. Jason is still with me, and he gets lots of raises because he is great at what he does. But now he always waits for sunny days, blue skies, and puffy white clouds on the horizon before approaching me. I told you he was smart. The best way to ask for a raise is to wait for the right time. It also indicates to your boss that you have certain amount of discernment and appreciation for what he might be going through himself. I need my people to be plugged into what's going on with me. What impresses me most about people is their work ethic. A certain amount of swagger is okay. It's just another form of enthusiasm. But bottom line, I look for results. When I mentioned us to a salesperson that I had to cut her salary because she would made no sales in 9 months, she just went about nuts. But some things are common sense. What would she do if she had a non-productive salesperson on her own roster? If you knew your company was scheduled to give a major client presentation at 3 p.m., would you approach your boss at 2:45 to ask for a raise? Money, like a comedy, is all about timing. Be tenacious. The Art of the Deal contained a chapter called West Side Story about my acquisition of the West Side Yards, a 100-acre property fronting the Hudson River from 59th Street to 72nd Street. The chapter title was a deliberate double entendre, and as I know that the popular musical West Side Story had taken 10 years to put together. Its creative team had included no less than Leonard Bernstein, Jerome Robbins, Stephen Sondheim, and Arthur Lawrence. As so, whenever I experienced setbacks or delay on my West Side project, I would remind myself that I had some very illustrious company. It's now 17 years later, and it's still a work in progress, but the example set by the architects of the West Side Story has served me well. You don't create a classic overnight. I'm calling it Trump Place. It's a $5 billion project, the biggest development ever approved by the New York City Planning Commission. When it's done, Trump Place will have 5,700 residential units and more than 5 million square feet of commercial space. So far, 4 towers have been completed and are occupied, and 2 additional buildings are under construction. When we are done, there will be a total of 16 buildings on the site. Trump Place is a good example of why tenacity is crucial in business. I bought the property in 1974. We have hit snacks along the way and made many changes over time. but for more than 30 years we have persisted. At times, just about every executive will appear impatient, but to build something that endures, you have to take the long view. Recently, an employee told me that the pastor of her church had used Trump Place as an example of what a firm foundation should be, whether it be in faith, family, or as in my case, buildings. The pastor, whose church was near the construction site, would catch each building, go up and marvel at the immensity of the work. Each building could be 100 stories high, he said, considering the meticulous foundation work. My publisher sent me an inspiring book by Bill Shore called The Cathedral Within, which celebrates the commitment and hope necessary to build something that endures. It might be a cathedral like the one in Milan, which took 500 years to build, or it might be a community organization or a business. Paul Davis, the man developing Trump Place for me and my partners, is a true cathedral builder. I've rarely seen anyone work so hard or so diligently. Saturdays, Sundays. He's there at all hours, paying close attention to every impeccable details of the layouts, room sizes, and the quality of the fixtures. He's one of the big reasons for our success. Some things are worth waiting for. For me, Trump Place is one of those things. 16 beautifully designed buildings on the Hudson River, a 25-acre park, the upper west side as a backyard. This could prove to be the finest contribution to the city of New York. Time will tell, but I am in no rush and I won't stop until I am done. Golf is a brain game and practice makes perfect. Play golf. I made a lot of money on the golf course before I went into golf as a business. I found solutions to problems, new ideas for ventures, and even a new career. Golf has a way of giving you an equilibrium that you can't always find in the office. Doing what you love will always make you a winner, and after spending many happy hours on golf courses, I decided to build some of my own. I am now one of the biggest golf course developers in the United States, with 2 award-winning internationally acclaimed courses fully operational and 2 more in the works. My first course, the Trump International Golf Club in the Palm Beach, Florida, has been home to the ADP LPGA Championships for the 3 years. When I first decided to develop the most beautiful golf courses possible, I did some research and got in touch with the most respected designers in the business, the Fazio family. Just as Michelangelo had an affinity for sculpting marble, some people have an affinity for sculpting land. In this case, Jimmy and Tommy Fazio designed a dream come true for any golfer, not only visually but in terms of playability. The course opened in 1999. With its waterfalls and landscapes unique to Florida, Trump International Golf Course is already a landmark course in the state and the best course in Florida. My second course was Trump National at Barrier Cliff Manor in New York. We moved 3 million yards of earth, the largest land evacuation ever in Westchester County, and it was worth it. We were also dealing with stone which was used for walls and a spectacular waterfall on the 13th hole, a 101-foot cliff of black granite quarried from the property, which pumps 5,000 gallons a minute. The walls were built by my very talented stonemason Frank Zanzo. Membership costs rupees 3 lakh dollars. I think it's a bargain. My third golf course is Trump National Golf Club in a sumptuous area of New Jersey known as Bedminster. It is being designed by the master golf course architect himself, Tom Fazio. 3 times Golf Digest has named Zefio Fazio the best modern day golf course architect, and when you see this course, you will know why. It will be long, big, and beautiful, and I'm involved daily in the design and construction. Additional plans for this property, formerly owned by automaker John DeLorean and located in the heart of New Jersey's horse country, will include a second course and the world-class clubhouse designed in the colonial mansion style. I don't want to limit my golfing to the East Coast, so in 2002 I bought a course along 2 miles of the Pacific Ocean. What was formerly known as Ocean Trials in Palos Verdes will now be known as the Trump National Golf Club, Los Angeles. The course had fallen into disrepair under its previous owners. The 18th hole fell into the ocean, so I am rebuilding it with legendary golf course architect Pete Dye. We are also planning to build luxury estate homes on the property. When completed, this course will be best in California. Dave Anderson, Joy Cannon, me, and Ron Howard at the opening of Trump National Golf Club in Barrier Cliff Manor, New York. When we announced the deal, the Los Angeles Times reported, as he has so many times before, Trump has spotted a trend to tap. True, but mostly I was following my instincts and my interests. Building golf courses is not a big business for me, and it's unlikely that I will ever do another one. I want only the best. Sometimes I will sell memberships while I'm hitting balls on the practice range. People approach me and hand me checks. One recent day at my Florida course, a group of four wealthy friends came to me with checks of $3 lakh each. I said to myself, not bad, I'm playing a game I love and going home with 12 lakh dollars in my pocket. I realize that some of you don't care much about golf. Golf is one of those things that has aficionados, just as opera has die-hard fans who will fly around the world to catch a certain performance. To people who don't know or like opera, that seems absurd. I can't make you love golf, but believe me, once you have had the opportunity to play on the beautiful course, it could turn you into an enormous fan or even a passionate player, no matter how poorly you hit the ball. If anyone had told me 20 years ago that I had become a dedicated golf course developer, I would have sent them out of the room for being ridiculous. But golf has a transforming power. It's a brain game, yes. There is skill and technique involved, but just as important is requires concentration and assessment. It's a great way to improve your business skills, to learn how to maneuver. It can even be equated with learning how to negotiate, which is an art in itself. Golf is now also, in essence, a solitary game. Being an entrepreneur, even within a large company, is a solitary game. Ultimately, the rule here is not just to visit one of my golf courses, though you would be wise to do so, but to turn your passion into profit. The results of that passion will reward you in more ways than you ever could have expected. Passion is enthusiasm on a big scale. It is all encompassing and consuming. People with passion never give up because they will never have a reason to give up, no matter what their circumstances may be. It's an intangible momentum that make you indomitable. Take out the passion and you will have a fizzle or perhaps an okay product at best. Add the passion and you will be in a rarefied realm that every other passionista will recognize, and one that every person would like to enter. A friend of mine is a member of what I call the Lucky Sperm Club. Born into a wealthy family, he followed his father to Wall Street, but he was a total failure. He didn't like it and he couldn't do it. Meanwhile, he became increasingly involved in his Connecticut Country Club. He was named the head of the Greens Committee and took on the lead role in rebuilding the golf course. He loved it and was great at it. The club held a dinner for him out of gratitude for his volunteer work. I asked him, why don't you do this for a living? You are not for Wall Street, you are getting eaten alive there. He told me his family wouldn't understand if he quit a serious job to work on golf courses. Well, 2 years later he took my advice, quit the Wall Street job and is now working full time at renovating golf courses. He says he loves getting up in the morning and he is getting better than ever. Of course, you don't have to learn how to play golf to have a satisfying career, but no matter what you do, you must be passionate about it. There is no place like home. Brand yourself and toot your horn. I was originally going to call Trump Tower by another name, Tiffany Tower, for the most famous jewelry store next door. I asked a friend, do you think it should be a Trump Tower or Tiffany Tower? He said, when you change your name to Tiffany, call it Tiffany Tower. We have all seen the power of a brand name, especially quality brand names. Coco Chanel became world famous 80 years ago by naming her first perfume Channel Number 5, and it's still going strong in a fiercely competitive market. Her fragrance as well as her name has become timeless. She proved that the right ingredients can create a legend. Trump has become a great brand name due to my rigorous standard of design and quality. We all admire Rolls Royce cars, and I see every one of my ventures as being just that elite. Being a stickler has paid off, but because my buildings are considered to be the finest in the world. That may sound like bragging, but it's also a fact. I have never been one to confuse facts with fiction. In 2003, Chicago Tribune real estate columnist Mary Umberger attributed the sales for Trump International Hotel and Tower in Chicago to the Trump factor. Umberger reported the sales velocity surprises even experienced real estate players who told me at the sales inaugural that they doubted Trump's would again gain enough momentum because Chicago's luxury market was as is in a lull. Some people have written that I am boastful, but they are missing the point. I believe in what I say and I deliver the goods. If you are devoting your life to creating a body of work and you believe in what you do and what you do is excellent, you would better damn well that tell people you think so. Subtlety and modesty are appropriate for nuns and therapists, but if you are in business, you would better learn to speak up and announce your significant accomplishments to the world. Nobody else will. When I'm setting the price for a luxury apartment, I consider a lot of factors: the market, the location, and the competition. Then I set my own standards. Once, when some top of the line apartments weren't selling, I upped the price way over the competition. They started selling immediately. I view my work as an art form and approach it with the same intensity and ego as my ambitious artist would. I never planned on becoming a brand name, but the fit of my aesthetic nature with each product I became involved with has resulted in an expanding network of interests. The success of the Trump name worldwide has been a surprise. It's been a good surprise. For example, using my name on a building carries with it a promise of the highest quality available and at least a $5 million price tag. That's just for the name because it will be worth it to the developers and they know it. That building will be up to my standards. When I remember the line from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, what's in the name? I have to laugh. What's in the name can be far more than either the bird or I ever could have imagined. We have all noticed the ascendancy of the brand names and the power they have, from Levi's to Louis Vuitton. Some people are against this widespread branding, seeing as it another form of labeling. I see it as a viable outlet for creativity. If you are on the brink of the success in your career, some snob might ask you dismissively, "You don't want to become a brand name, do you?" Anyone who asks you that doesn't have the big picture in focus, and they are usually just envious. I can get a project off the ground in no time now, whereas an unknown developer would require many months, if not years, to get something going. The number of people I employ to get a project finished reaches into the thousands, and those people would not have a building to work on without a developer to give them a job. Commerce and art cannot function independently. They must work together. That is the beauty of a successful brand name. If there is a downside to being a well-known name, it is that you become an easy target. The media needs to tear down what it builds up. That's just part of journalism. The stories are about heroes and villains, or success or failure. If you are a brand name, they are going to take a shot at you. It comes with the territory, and I have learned to live with it. As we say on The Apprentice, it's not personal, it's business. Fortunately, if you have the critics who matter on your side, reading the newspaper can be a lot of fun. Herbert Muschamp, the architecture critic for the New York Times, is a scholar and an authority when it comes to the buildings. To receive a compliment from him has an intrinsic value that will never diminish. When he wrote an article on Trump Tower, World Tower, and described it as a handsome hunk of a glass tower, I was very honored. Here is more of what he wrote. Although Donald Trump prefers to publicize the aggressive side of his nature, it's the manly thing to do. He is also the only beauty freak at large in New York City real estate development. It's not surprising that unofficial approval of the Trump's building should come by the way of Museum of Modern Art. The tower embodies the Miesian aesthetic through which the modern design department's taste was initially formulated. I hope Trump sticks with this material. Trump does better when he ignores his critics than when he pays attention to them. So don't be afraid to toot your own horn when you have done something worth tooting about. And don't believe the critics unless they love your work. Go with your gut. Being an entrepreneur is not a group effort. You have to trust yourself. You may have superb academic credentials, but without instincts, you will have a hard time getting to and staying at the top. This is one of those gray areas that remain an enigma even to those who have finally owned business instincts. There are inexplicable signs that can guide you to or away from certain deals and certain people. For example, within a few seconds of meeting Mark Burnett, the creator of The Apprentice, I knew he was 100% solid, both as a person and as a professional, which is a remarkable accomplishment in the entertainment industry. On the other hand, I have met people that I have an aversion to for no particular reason, and while I try not to be judgmental, I have reason by now to trust my gut. Carl Jung said our conscious minds use only 5% of our brain's power for daily functioning. And if we can learn to tap into that unconscious, subconscious, and dormant 95%, the results can be amazing. Be optimistic, but always be prepared for the worst. There are a lot of ups and downs, but you can ride them out if you are prepared for them. Learning to expect problems saved me from a lot of wasted energy, and it will save you from unexpected surprises. It's like Wall Street. It's like life. The ups and downs are inevitable, so simply try to be prepared for them. Sometimes I will ask myself why I want to take some new big challenge. A substantial loss is always a possibility. Can I handle it if it does not go well? Will I be asking myself later, why did I ever do that? What was I thinking? I'm actually a very cautious person, which is different from being a pessimistic person. Call it positive thinking with a lot of reality checks. Look closely before changing careers. In 2000, I thought about running for president of the United States as a third party candidate. I proposed some sensible ideas: tax cuts for the middle class, tougher trade deals, a ban on unregulated soft money in campaigns, comprehensive healthcare reform. I formed an exploratory committee and met with Reform Party leaders, but in the end, I realized I was enjoying my business too much to run for office. Remember the rule I mentioned earlier about how you shouldn't equivocate? That may work for business, but in politics, you usually have to watch your words. I'm too blunt to be a politician. Then there is my long held aversion to shaking hands. More on this in a moment. Had I entered the race, I wouldn't have been very popular. Even during the few months I was considering candidacy, I noticed that people began to treat me differently, in a more reserved, less friendly way. Before I had been the Donald, the someone they would wave and smile at. Suddenly it was a different ball game, and it did not seem like much fun to me. One guy I had been friendly for with years saw me at Lekirk and for the first time in my life called me Mr. Trump. He had always called me Donald. That was a real heads up. A lot of successful business people think they can apply their management skills to politics, but I have noticed that only a few select, like Michelle Bloomberg or Zone Corzine, succeed. Most others lack the temperament for it. There is a larger point here, beyond the obvious ones, about not confusing your talent for office politics with a gift for electoral politics. Anyone with more than a little curiosity and ambition will at some point be tempted to try a different challenge on a new terrain. Take the risk, but before you do everything you can to learn what you are getting yourself into, and be as sure as you can that you have got the right mindset for the job. Avoid the handshake whenever possible. Some business executives believe in a firm handshake. I believe in no handshake. It's a terrible practice. So often I see someone who is obviously sick with a bad cold or the flu who approaches me and say, Mr. Trump, I would like to shake I would like to shake your hand. It's a medical fact that this is how germs are spread. I wish we could follow the Japanese custom of bowing instead. The worst is having to shake hands during a meal. On one occasion, a man walked out of the restaurant's bathroom, jiggling his hands as though they were still wet and he hadn't used a towel. He spotted me, walked over to my table, and said, "Mr. Trump, you are the greatest. Would you please shake my hand?" I knew that if I didn't shake his hand, he would be saying terrible things about me for 30 years. I also knew that if I agreed, my own hands would be loaded with germs and whatever the hell he would carry out of the bathroom. I had a choice. In this case, I decided to shake hands because I was a little overweight at the time and knew that if I shook his hands, I wouldn't eat my meal, and that would be a good thing. Pay attention to the details. If you don't know every aspect of what you are doing, down to the paper clips, you are setting yourself up for some unwelcome surprises. I once read about an esteemed brain surgeon in San Francisco who was known for being fanatical about details and organization. He would go over the components of an upcoming surgery in his hand as he jogged every morning. He would visualize every detail as if to remind himself of everything he had learned, every difficulty and complication he might encounter. He wasn't known for his bedside manner, but he was the best. If I had to have brain surgery, he is the kind of surgeon I would choose. But you don't have to be a brain surgeon to pay attention to the details. Connect with your audience. The Art of Public Speaking Part 1. One of the problems with my schedule lately is that I am unable to accommodate most of the requests I receive from public speaking. I happen to enjoy giving speeches. I know some people dread the thought of having to give a presentation in a boardroom, let alone appearing before the thousands of people. Not me. I get so much energy from my audience that it is always fun. I will bet a lot of you are wondering whether I am making that up to sound like I am not afraid of anything. It's possible I am forgetting a few stressful movements. Years ago, I was probably nervous about facing an audience, but I got over it. Being afraid of speaking in public is something you can conquer. The following pointers can be applied by people who find presentations, whatever the size of the audience, to be a roadblock on their highway to success. It helps if you are a naturally gregarious person. My driver, Tony, recalls the time when I was going to deliver a speech. When he were about 5 minutes away, I asked Tony what I was supposed to be talking about that night. Tony couldn't hide his shock. He said, "Boss, don't you know? There are 20,000 people waiting for you." I said, "Yeah, but I have been busy. I'm sure it will be okay." I was trying to reassure him. "No, go," he said. "Why? Where are your notes? Didn't you make any notes?" I said, "I'm making some now." Tony was looking at me through the rear view mirror with an expression of astonishment. I think he was checking to see whether I was kidding or I wasn't. I would been asked to give the speech by Anthony Robbins, the best-selling author and self-help guru. I had been paid a great deal of money for the speech, but I would never ask how many people I would be speaking in front of. As I was leaving the office to go to Philadelphia, my secretary told me I would be speaking at a basketball arena, the Vashovia Center, and that would be approximately 20,000 people there. I said, "You have got to be kidding. I've never spoken before 20,000 people before." Telling it like it is. That situation could cause panic in some people. Instead, I thought about my audience not as a massive group of people just waiting to judge me, but as individuals who might be there because they are interested in something. Then I started thinking about what people are interested and the kind of questions people like to ask me. I was ready. I certainly had a gut feeling that we were all in for a great time. Leaving an ashen-faced Tony in the car, I hopped out, ready to embrace his experience. Somehow the audience picked up on my energy and got much more than a speech. They got give and take that no one who was there will soon forget. We had a hilarious time, and we walked away having learned a few things as well. Tony Robbins turned out to be a terrific guy. Until I met him, I didn't believe in him or trust him, but that was only because I was getting my information secondhand. Having gotten to know him and his wife, I now wholeheartedly endorse him. He is out to do good and help people. His seminars are absolutely a happening, and after our successful experience in Philadelphia, I agreed to make 10 more appearances. All in all, it was a valuable lesson in public speaking. Think about your audience first. The rest will fall into place. Granted, having useful information to convey will help too, but turning into people is the first step. I'm good at that, and I don't have to try too hard. Even my office, with a few people around, a conversation will never be one sided. I like to involve everyone and hear what they have to say. So, involve your audience, they will appreciate being included. Cover these 11 bases. The art of public speaking, part 2. When you are speaking, it helps to be prepared. That may sound funny after what I have just told you, but if you read every day, you will really be prepared. Maybe not for the fine points you are specifically speaking about, but usually we are asked to speak something about we are expert at or at least familiar with. Cover your bases mentally. Imagine yourself being in the audience. What are you looking for? Being able to trade places with the audience can open you up to a lot of ideas. Have examples and references in your mind to back up your statements. Make them as vivid as possible for your learners. Notes can sometimes function as useful reference points, especially if you are speaking to a large audience. If you are prepared, no one can tell that you are using them. Ideally, you don't want to read a speech. For some reason, no matter how good your delivery is, when you read a speech, it's usually boring. Everyone sees that you are reading it, and it's never quite the same as delivering it off the cuff. Notes offer the best of both worlds. They keep you focused and moving in the right direction without turning you into a stiff. Be a good storyteller. People like stories, and they will remember them. A speech shouldn't become a lecture. Humor goes a long way, and it will remind you and everyone else that we all got a lot of things in common. Storytelling is a skill, so work on it. it. It's helpful to listen to comedians. The good ones can teach you the art of great timing. Think about the common denominator. How can all of us relate one another? How can you enable your audience to relate you and to what you are saying? People see me as a rich and powerful person, but like most people, also have a daily routine and a family. I get stuck in traffic jams too. I have known some real gems and some real wackos. I have cranky moments and bad days like everyone else. A lot of experience can be understood and appreciated by your audience because they have had them too. Look for what you have in common and lead with it. You will create an immediate bond because they will realize they can relate to you. When you are on the podium, you are the entertainer. People are there to learn something, but also to be entertained. One reason Elvis Presley was such a great entertainer is that he made every effort to tune in to his audience. It was give and take all the way. Wayne Newton does that too. Even people who thought they wouldn't like Libres became big fans after experiences his live shows, and nobody did it better than Sinatra. Some people call it charisma, I call it tuning in and delivery. Study Regis Philbin. He is relaxed and funny, and he always relates to his audiences. Yet they love them. He is perfect example of the give and take that necessary for successful public speaking. Regis doesn't just speak, he shares. He is as magnanimous a performer as he is a person. Watch him, pay attention, and you will learn a lot. Be able to poke fun at yourself. This will make you accessible to people even if you are up on the stage and in the spotlight. We have all had disasters in our lives, major or minor. To be able to laugh at them in retrospect is healthy and helpful. Use the blips that we all encounter in our lives to your advantage. I remember a particular question and answer period that followed one of my speeches during the time when Ivana and I were going through our divorce and the tabloids were having a field day. The first question was from the guy who asked, "You don't mind if I call you the Donald, do you?" So I responded, "Not if you don't mind if I call you Ivana." We all had a good laugh and then proceeded to his real question. Learn to think on your feet. Memorable public speaking involves a good deal of spontaneity. It's a lot like negotiating. You have to focus on your goals but remain flexible. A lot of people are terrific writers but not so great at getting their ideas across orally. Writing is a form of thinking, and so is speaking. The difference is that you don't have time to go back and correct yourself when you are on stage. It's not a first draft, and it's not a rehearsal. Be prepared for the performance because that's what expected of you. Listen in your daily life. Every day can be a preparation for a speech or a presentation. Have you ever said to yourself, I will have to remember that one, after hearing someone say something particularly clever or unusual? Even offhand comments that you overhear can be useful. Remember them. Make notes if you must. Everything and everyone can become material. I was in the back of an elevator once, behind a group of guys. Their conversation was so vivid, so real that I tuned in and tried to figure out what they would captured, why they would captured my attention. Aside from the fact that they had a captive audience for a short amount of time, I realized that their speaking rhythm was syncopated, quick, and to the point. What they were saying wasn't all that fascinating, but their delivery was. They made a normally mundane subject, what they were getting for lunch and how they were getting it, seems interesting. Have a good time. It's contagious. If your audience believe you are enjoying what you are doing, they will enjoy being in your company. If it's an obvious core to you, forget it and find someone else to speak for you. If you are busy executive, there is probably someone within your organization who can speak effectively in your place. Sometimes when I am asked to speak and my schedule won't allow it, I will ask someone who works for me if they would be interested in filling in. Charlie Rees, executive VP of the development in my organization, was a professor at Columbia University before he came to work for me. He is a dynamic speaker, but I wouldn't have known this if I hadn't asked him to help out when I was in a bind. He has a gift for public speaking because he enjoys teaching and is enthusiastic about what he does. At first, I worried he might turn out to be a bit pedantic considering his background, but he wasn't. Everyone had a good time. Another important aspect of having a good time: before you speak, remind yourself that it doesn't matter all that much. Don't don't feel that the weight of the world is on you. Most of the people in the room don't care how well or poorly you do. It's just not that important. It's merely a speech, not an earthquake or a war. You will have a better time and be a better speaker if you keep it all in perspective. That said, public speaking and presentations may be a necessary step on your ladder to success. For quick reference, here is my procedure for discovering a talent you would thought you didn't have. Think about your audience first. Get your audience involved. Be prepared. Be a storyteller. Be aware of common denominator. Be an entertainer. Be able to laugh at yourself. Think on your feet. Listen. Have a good time. And of course, study Regis Philbin. Change your attitude. When I say attitude, when I say altitude, I am not referring to my jets. It's my own interpretation of the word attitude. I like flying because it gets me when I'm going fast. Likewise, if you have the right attitude, you can get where you are going fast. What's the altitude of your attitude? Is it high frequency or low frequency? Having a high frequency will attune you to a wavelength that exudes confidence and clear-sighted enthusiasm. I am a firm believer that this is the half the battle of any enterprise. I am a tough-minded optimist. I learned a long time ago that my productivity was increased by a large percentage simply by learning to let off negativity in all forms as quickly as I could. My commitment to excellence is thorough, so thorough that it negates the wavelength of negativity immediately. I used to have a jab negativity mentally. By now, it just bounces off me within a movement of getting near me. As you may have heard, I don't like germs. I'm still waging a personal crusade to replace the mandatory and unsanitary handshake with the Japanese custom of bowing. To me, germs are just another kind of negativity. Negativity is also a form of fear, and fear can be paralyzing. On the golf course, I have heard great athletes tell me that they can hit a ball 300 yards down, right down the middle of the fairway, but they can't finish the hole by putting the ball 3 feet into the cup. Recently, I played with a man who is terrific of putting. He hit a magnificent 235 yard shot and was 7 feet from the cup. Then he looked over at me and said, "Now the hard part begins." Another friend, also a great golfer, is paralyzed by his fear of losing his ball. Each time we played a hole near a lake, he would look down and say to his ball, "I have a feeling I will never see you again." I have told these two guys that they must start thinking positively and they will sabotage themselves. Very often, negative thinking stems from low self esteem. You have to work on this yourself. Maybe you have received a lot of hard knocks. I have learned to deal with them because I get knocked a lot. Quickly see them for what they are, knocks. But you don't have to open the door unless you choose to. I have gotten to the point where I see knocks as opportunity and as an insight into whoever is doing the knocking. One way to chase low attitude away is to think about how fortunate you already are and how much you still have to look forward to. You can better your best. You can better your best day at any time. Very surprising things can happen, but you must, and I repeat, must be open to them. How can you fly if you have already clipped your own wings? I don't have time to encourage as many people as I would like to, but whenever it seems appropriate, I recommend The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale, one of my father's favorite books, and mine too. Some people may think it's old fashioned, but what Peale has written always be true. He advocates fear over faith over fear. Faith can overcome the paralysis that fear brings with it. I can remember a time when I had a choice to make. When I was billions of dollars in debt, I had to take one of the two courses of action, a fearful defensive one or a faithful riskier one. I carefully analyzed the situation, realized what was causing the uneasy feeling of fear, and immediately replaced it with blind faith, and simply because I had nothing else to go on at the time. Then I resolved that as long as I remained positive and disciplined, things would work out. There was not much more I could do. I didn't know how it was going to go, but I was determined to move forward, even though it wasn't easy. Within a relatively short amount of time, the situation was settled positively. I learned a lot from that and have since had a better understanding of what courage really is. Without facing my own fear, I would have not known. When I think of someone who is tough, I also think of someone who has courage. People who persist have courage because often it's a lot easier to give up. Some of the bravest people I have met are children with handicaps. I'm active with United Cerebral Palsy. What those kids deal with is humbling, but they are enthusiastic and thrilled with every day they have been given. You have been given a day too. When you are down, look at it that way. Another way can equal another chance. Sometimes, as obvious as it sounds, we really do have to take things one day at a time. Immediately after the events of September 11, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we all kept going one day at a time and we still moving forward. Maybe you have gotten to the point where you think you can't get through another day. That's short sighted of you. You are missing the big picture. You are on the runway, but your fuel supply is the problem. You won't get off the ground without it. Feed yourself some positive thoughts and can take off at any time. Ever wonder what makes certain people keep going? I do. Abraham Lincoln encountered a steady procession of setbacks, but he just kept at it. Nothing deterred him. He must have had a lot of faith because he didn't receive much encouragement along the way. He is an excellent example of someone who never gave up. The other extreme is the person who seems to run into obstacles with the unerring aim of the marksman. I knew a guy who was remarkably accident prone. If there was something to run into, he would find it. If there was a hole in the ground, he would break his foot by stumbling into it. Once he was in such a slam bang accident that he was hospitalized for 6 months before being completely patched up. Finally, the day of his release from the hospital arrived and it was decided that he should get an ambulance ride home just to be on the safe side. As the ambulance was taking him home, it crashed into a car. Another spectacular slam bang accident. My friend was immediately brought back to the hospital in a new ambulance dispatched to the scene of the disaster. What can I say? Maybe he's just a really unlucky guy, or maybe he's a loser. I know that sounds harsh, but let's face it, some people are losers. The altitude level of losers is so low that they should walk around in scuba gearing all day. They are below sea level on the altitude map. We all know people like that, and they might make great comedians because they have so much material. But first, they would have to learn to be funny. Honestly, I have known people who are such accomplished losers that I think that that's what they devote their time to. How can I be the biggest screw up possible? How can I prove the born loser theory to be correct? How can I defy the law of probability to make it an absolute disaster every time? How can I achieve a perfect record of total wipeouts? How can I how far can I get at 0 miles per hour? How can I reach the lowest frequency possible? How can I operate so that radar could never possibly find me even I get lost, without which I probably will? These people need a new speedometer. Get going, move forward, aim high, plan for a takeoff. Don't just sit on the runway and hope someone will come along and push the airplane. It will simply won't happen. Change your attitude and gain some altitude. Believe me, you will love it up here.